Hi, I'm Paul Verschure, and together with my colleague Ferdinand from Siemens, we're speaking with Eva Maria Wiecko about how collaboration functions in the world of acquisitions and mergers. Trained as an art historian, Eva completed her degree in international management and began working for Goldman Sachs in 2004 in different capacities. And in 2020, she was named Managing Director for Investment Banking at Goldman Sachs in Germany.
Eva, would you like to start with just giving a short description of your professional trajectory that brought you to the point where you are now?
Sure, happy to. So I joined Goldman right after university. I was sort of talked into it basically by my colleagues at that time or my colleagues at uni, because everybody told me that when you have an offer, you have to go join Goldman. I wasn't sure at that time what it's all about, because none of my sort of direct personal background is related to banking or investment banking. And I stayed for a long time, and there are many reasons for that. But one of the reasons is really the culture of the firm, and the fact that I felt from very early on that I have a big impact on the culture. And I can have a big impact on the culture if I speak up. And that was really the beginning, and that's what kept me for now almost 14 years at Goldman. I managed to walk through different stations like it is in a corporate career. When you start in one office and then move to London and go back to Germany, and I ended up now in the Frankfurt office of Goldman, being a managing director in our investment banking department, which is what commonly is understood under the M&A execution or M&A department.
Right. So now, in that experience, also the position you're at, you are immersed in a number of processes that we could call collaborative, right? You have collaboration inside your organization, and then also with the entities you work with outside. So what types of collaboration would you distinguish in that context?
First and foremost, which is really sort of my everyday job when I start my day at 9 a.m. is really the collaboration within the teams that I work with. And I happen to, by definition of my job now, I happen to mostly lead teams of 4 to 5 people that are working on certain projects, which are mostly mergers, acquisitions, and financing transactions for clients of Goldman's. And these are colleagues of mine that are throughout the different levels of seniority, and mostly 4 or 5. And I speak to them every day, frequently on how the project is going, what the next steps are, and what needs to be done. So that's the first one, which is very easy because it is very much common sense of what needs to be done. The teams know very well how we work together, how the flat, but there's obviously a hierarchy in this team. So how this team works and functions together, even though we tend to switch teams a lot. So I work with new people probably every 3-4 months. But it's still it's relatively easy the way how it's set up, because everybody knows exactly what his and her role in this team is and what's the common goal. And I think that by virtue of the organization and the acquisition of talent, the people are in a sense expecting how they will be asked to work, and we have a lot of common ground, and probably there is too much similarity. That's what we try to change now in these teams. But I think the either it's people who join from university or other organizations very much expect what they will need to be what will need to be done at Goldman. So I think that's the easy part. And now the more challenging part is to collaborate when it comes to collaborating with clients on big transactions, because we are M&A specialists. So for us, mergers and acquisitions are our everyday bread. Whereas for our clients, these are the big transformational situations in the life of an organization, which makes the collaboration with the client a much more difficult situation. I sometimes explain it to like when I talk privately about it to my partner, who is a doctor. We see a lot of similarities there, because I'm working in a hospital for M&A, And our clients are like patients. They come only to the hospital if they need some help. And for them, it's already extraordinary to be in a hospital. They already feel sort of the slight discomfort of being in this situation. And their collaboration is much more difficult because it's first and foremost what we need to win from our clients is trust, that they trust us, that we are all on the same side, that we all try to achieve the same goal, and that we adjust the way we collaborate and the pace of execution and the pace of the situation to the needs of the organization. So it's really, that is very much interactive and needs to be adapted, and is very different depending on the size, the culture of the organization, and how important the project really is for the living of the organization.
What's the scale of these M&A operations? So what's the largest operation just in volume in terms of market cap, employees, and so on? What's the scale of such a process?
So it can be very large, and I think one of the largest transactions in Germany I worked on was the whole change of, or the set of transactions around the utility industry from RWE, E.ON, Innogy in between, and it was really about 40 plus billion market caps and sort of huge organizations, and also about changing completely. Splitting the organization into two, and then changing people's workplaces, and merging also two cultures. It really had a big impact on the organization itself, on the regional, even regional setup, and where they will sit, where the headquarters will be, where people will go to work. And ultimately, also all of this was accompanied by the fact that the industry has had to fundamentally change from producing power by power stations run by gas and oil and nuclear power stations to renewable energy, etc. So it all had to happen at one time. And when we started to work on the project, really nobody really knew which part of which organization am I going to be, how is this going to go. We only had this common goal, which was extremely short term for the amount of work that had to be done. And there needed to be a lot of working together and collaboration from different sides, from political side, from the employees themselves, but also us, all the advisors involved there. And it was not only obviously investment banks, but also some other advisors, lawyers, and consultants that had to basically all work towards a common goal.
Right. So
that was the.
Okay, so you have quite some moving parts in that process, right? So then do you approach that from a certain methodological perspective where you say, all right, to make this work, we should first establish trust, and then we should establish something else, and then something else, and then we work down the list? Or so how do you approach that? And is there a method?
Yes, there is. So there is a structure of how to organize, how to plug in the project itself of sort of corporate reorganization into the everyday life or the everyday operation of the company, because these companies obviously have to do what they have done every day still, and then there is a new that comes on top. And this we first need to establish the understanding of the organization that it's actually going to be extraordinary times, because next to your normal day-to-day operational job, there's going to be this new project on top, and you will have to talk to a lot of new people and who will ask questions that are not where you will see that they don't necessarily exactly understand what you do every day. And I think in order to be able to do that, you have to establish some type of project organization, and which is centered around certain work streams that need to be done. And then it's really, I think, a lot is understanding how much involvement from the organization itself is going to come, and how much additional people, additional human resources you will in the end need in order to actually make it work. So it's structured on the one side that we have very much a very good view on what work streams need to be done, and then there is a little bit of diagnosis to be done on how much can the organization do itself, our client do itself, how much help will they need. And actually, I think a good project manager, project leader, which in this case oftentimes is the investment bank, is the one who is able to easily or initially establish status quo and say, what is the status quo? Who else do we need? And then make it really work from day to day. So there is a method to it by dividing it into subgroups and sub work streams. And then I think this is 20 to 30% of the whole thing. And the rest is really on the go, actually realizing how is it, what are the issues here? What are the conflicts? What are departments within the organization that don't work that well together? What are individual interests of people? So it's a lot of politics and psychology into this as well, in order to make sure that everybody has a goal that is at the end helping to reach the overall goal, but you need to establish most of the time sub goals to keep people motivated. Our projects normally tend to last from 6 to 12 months, even 18 months in case of such bigger projects. And if you imagine if someone asks you to do 18 months of additional on top job, of high, very, very high quality, because it's super important for the organization, on top of what you do anyway every day, that's a long period of time. And in order to keep you motivated, it cannot be just ringing the bell on the stock exchange in 18 months. It has to be smaller goals in between, and smaller goals for individuals that run the work streams or help run the work streams.
So now, you have split up the different activities, but your methodology covers, as you say, 20 to 30%, and the rest is also a deeper understanding of people and organizations. Now, I guess it's on that part of the divide that the concept of collaboration resides, right? Because as you say, you have to establish goals and sub goals. So now, how do you establish goals and sub goals in such a heterogeneous environment?
I think you need to make sure that you understand, especially in situations where organizations will be split, or there will be a new firm joining the other in case of mergers, to really understand very early on how these firms will go together and who will be in what position also after the transaction has completed. So it's not only about the transaction itself, but it's also what will be people's individual interests once the transaction really worked out and is completed. And when you start to understand how the organization will look like, or what's the goal of how it's supposed to look like, you can involve people in different work streams and involve people in completing the goal. But you need to understand where they will end up, because they will mostly, or what's their intermediate goal. Maybe they try to apply for a new position within the organization within a short period of time, and then you have to understand that, and you establish these goals really only by individual contact and establishing relationships. And you understand what they actually want to achieve in terms of their career, but also their position today. And then you know how to involve them, or how to sometimes even, it's not only about involving, it's also maybe sometimes about avoiding too much involvement from certain people, if you know that it's going to be very difficult to actually align their personal goals with the goals that you actually have as a project manager. So sometimes it's keeping them satisfied, informed, but maybe focused on something else than what you will be mainly focusing on, because too much involvement from their side will be difficult, because the alignment is not there, and their role will be a different role over time. So and it's really very personal in the end. I think it's about personal relationships and understanding each situation specifically, and understanding also how the organization works and who is in charge, and who's how people get motivated in different teams. It's very heterogeneous in the end. I think most of those organizations are very much driven by still a strong leadership culture, but also a quite hierarchical culture. I think that varies a little bit across countries and organizations. But on average, my experience is when I came from university with all this management theory and all that you're being taught, and into sort of organizations, real life organizations, I realized that not a lot of this is already sort of reality. There is still a lot of hierarchical and structured thinking, and the sort of, even if organizations tend to believe they are very meritocratic, in the end they tend to be especially in critical situations, they tend to be very hierarchical. That's my experience.
Right. Oh, that's very interesting. And but I would like to unpack a little bit what you were saying, right? Because you talked a lot about the importance of addressing the people in the organization, and in some sense, it sounds very much like a very customized approach, like we have to massage people to fit in some process. But those people, who are those people?
Project managers or managers of different work streams, probably mostly mid-level managers of firms. So head of treasury, head of
the board or the CEO or
no.
Okay.
Most of the time, the board and this. I mean, if you have taken the decision to do such a project, that is the decision is already made in the board, and most of the times the board is already standing after that and really like pushing for it. That's when you really kick off the project. Before that, you need to convince mostly the board on the supervisory board in the German word. And that's before you actually start. When you really start on the execution, that's more going more further down into the organization and really aligning people's interest on that side of things. I personally think that's oftentimes more challenging because it's less rational and it's less clear what individual goals are. Because on the board level, in general, apart from several specific situations, but in general, there is especially in listed companies, which most of the time I deal with, there is still the alignment of the general goal of the board is to maximize shareholder value. And if there is certain consensus about achieving this goal, then hopefully it works. And if there is big opposition in the board, then mostly these big transactions don't happen because the opposition starts before you even dive into the project itself. That's a slightly different and probably even more customized process, and because there is a lot of very individual decisions, people who are, everyone is basically in the same position of strength, and then it's really about the ability to convince that this is a good idea. But I think maybe some bankers will tend to believe that they actually initiate strategic projects. I think we are more facilitators of strategic projects than we initiate them, because if someone decides to develop the organization into a totally different organization in the future and believes in some certain technology or certain direction, a strategic direction, mostly it's coming from within the organization, that there is a belief, that something needs to change and you need to go into strategic direction. So where I really play a role as a banker is more helping execute it and helping make it reality, more than develop the strategic concept as such. We're sometimes being used as sparring partners for that, but not necessarily we are the initiators of such ideas.
But that would mean that a first level of collaboration that already happens before you really get engaged is actually the level of the boards of the different entities to come to a common view that is in their collective benefit to merge. Correct?
Yes.
And only then do you get brought on board to in some sense make sure that also happens in a comprehensive way. But now that process of the strategic collaboration at the level of the board, this might in itself also be fragile. No, because people might change their mind. Or people might learn more about an organization as you're in there and then understand like, oh, wait, my decision was based on the wrong premises, right? So how then do you keep at the top level of the organization the sense of a collaborative effort for a common goal intact?
Mm. I think so. I think on the board, coming back to the sort of board level question, I think yes, people have to be convinced that this is a good transaction or is a good decision they have taken. On the other side, especially in the public market environment, a lot of this is also driven by the virtue of the premium price and where how much do you offer and what is the premium over your current price. And sometimes you can have good arguments as a board member against certain offers, but they have to be economic in nature because your shareholders are driven by return on capital considerations only, mostly. And now it's changing a bit now, but mostly capital goes to there where the return on capital is highest. So there is a certain element of enforcement in this if you are a board member of the target that is being taken over. But obviously not all situations are like this. And there are also situations where that needs to be the collective belief of on both sides. And I think that this is a good deal and that there is not a better alternative. And it's even the fiduciary duty of the board to actually go and look for other alternatives. And I think keeping everyone engaged and is the question here is also how much influence they can have on the future of the organization and how much they believe that this is really the best home they can get for their people and their organization. And this is really where collaboration comes into place. And I think we're also one has to be very thoughtful about how to acquire and engage an organization and establish, like, put it within your organization without the new team members or the new members are feeling that they have been taken over. The word takeover by definition has something a little bit aggressive in it. And I think that's really engaging people and giving them proper roles in the new setup where they feel that they can gain and benefit from a bigger organization. And why I think the one level below the board is also very important is because these are mostly the people in the organization that believe that in the next 5 to 10 years they will be running the firm or the organization or the company, and they are really thoughtful about their future there. Whereas board level members might be much more short-term oriented because they want to make it a success within the short term, and sometimes they have attractive exit options after such a merger. But the one level below is really where the longer term perspective in the organization is. And I think oftentimes when the board level discussions take place, it gets a little bit underestimated that there needs to be the next generation people with a perspective on the organization who will drive the success of this really. And I think organizations that ultimately tend to be very good at sort of taking over and consolidating markets are those that have the ability to involve the next generation managers into these decisions and give them a chance and a perspective in this, and show them that if the organization is getting bigger or if they are getting part of a bigger organization, it also means more chance for them to for developing their personal careers.
Right. And that's also the motivational aspect you mentioned earlier. That
yes.
To go back to the board, if the arguments at the level of the board are always return on investment or standardly, so this is like 90% of the cases or 95%, what's the number you would give that? Or 99% even?
I would say in the US it's probably 90 plus.
Mm-hmm.
I think in Europe it's probably a bit different because many firms are also co-owned by families, co-owned by the state or by some other foundations, other organizations, and there it's totally not only return on capital, it's sometimes also the importance and the standing of the organization in the country or in the region, or the relative importance of the organization for the region, oftentimes up to some, and obviously in Germany, which I think we are also being probably, especially these days, admired by some others. It's also about the employees and how they will react to it and end up. And it makes the discussions much more complex because there's different motivations. But on the other side, there is a lot of security that everybody will go into the right direction. And I think if I compare my sort of US takeover to the German experience, then it's the involvement of the employee representatives, and which mostly are on the board of directors or at least in the supervisory board. That's the part where again there is another level of complexity. I think in the US it's really very, very capital and return on capital driven. In Germany is I think it's less than 80% personally.
Okay, but it will still be have a decisive in the whole equation, right? And
yes,
what is interesting about that is that if we talk about collaboration, as you also describe it yourself, right? We talk about goals and goal setting. But if in the end there's actually only one goal that's being served, then that's not an option. And it's just a quantitative analysis. So in some sense, the market is coercing organizations to come together instead of collaborating to come together. So how would you see that? Can we speak of an economic coercion in this domain of mergers and acquisitions?
I think yes. In the end, you have to be able, and everybody who is publicly listed is slightly different, obviously, for companies that are run by a single person who can basically do whatever he or she prefers. And there might be different, but then the motivation is really different to say there is a commonality in it, because then it's different personalities, really. But I think if you think about the capital market environment, the public capital market environment, I think yes, because it's ultimately you need to prove, and short-term prove, that there is an economic benefit of bringing companies together. And we can't forget that the big, as much as we like to think as in terms of synergies, and synergies by definition have the hint of there is a collaboration, two minds come together and there is something, they create more, and there are synergies from this. This is kind of the nice part of kind of synergies, where you think that you're combining more knowledge together and then you creating something new out of it. That's the nice part of this, or the more optimistic part of the synergy. But we can't forget that a big part of the synergy is also cost cutting, and cost cutting is just asking one person to do probably 20% more and then cover the job of another person and take the other person out and ask them to do something totally different, or even leave the company in the end of the day. So, and I think part of the M&A strategy of some organizations is obviously also cost synergy. So there is a lot of behind that is also the better economic performance and efficiency, and which is, I think, also a symptomatic for a very established market, where you have a lot of very established. Now it's changing a little bit, because of the technological, I don't know if we should call it revolution or fast evolution, whatever the best word for it is. But now I think and also my job is very, very much driven by that, is that firms tend to not only look for optimization of the already existing, but tend to look for new business model that they can add to their business, because they fundamentally believe that they will be doing something completely different from what they do today in 10 years' time. And I spent like the last 14 years in banking, and the years after the financial crisis and everything. And I never remember a time where somebody from a very established firm that is producing something would tell me that the CEO or the CEO would tell me, I'm producing X today, boxes or whatever, cars, or I don't know, whatever it is today. And what will I be doing in 10 years? The thing I know is that I will not be doing what I'm doing now. And I think 10 years ago, if you ask people, you're producing cranes or cars or some other forms of equipment, if you ask them, what will you be doing in 10 years from now, they will say, I would be producing better cars or better cranes. And now we are in a very different environment. I think that makes it so exciting that now the transactions are partially, which makes it also much more difficult for us, by the way, that firms are trying to buy new technology, new ideas, and new culture. And it's less about the economic aspect of return on capital within the next 3 to 5 years, and is more about having a business in 10 plus years. But that is changing right now. It's not the biggest part of the market, but I think that will fundamentally also change the way these decisions are driven, because they are not driven by the short-term cost cut and the improvement and the very clear, very measurable way of collaboration. But this is less measurable because you need more time to integrate a very technologically advanced organization into a more established organization and actually develop the product together. And sometimes the decision today are taken to go together, even you don't exactly know what the product will look like, but you tend to believe that adding this knowledge and this expertise to your organization will at ultimate bring some new product into life, but very different from what it used to be.
Okay, so now so we understand now a bit the economic forces that might drive the merger. And also you indicate that right now new factors are coming up. But let's look at that later, because now, okay, the board has decided we're going to do this. And the board, in the end, if you would push them, will put an economic argument on the table, return on investment. But now with that, you have to go inside the organization. And of course, you will encounter people in different positions who would say, I don't care about return on investment. My interest in life is different, or I'm more worried about my job and so on, right? So now, how do you make that translation step?
I think that's really to find out what the role of these people could be in the new combined organization. And this is a joint work of sort of the advisor, but also jointly with obviously the board members who have the responsibility to think about how to allocate the resources afterwards. And it's very important that people have clarity what's going to happen, especially people who have to drive and motivate others is what's going to happen. And I think there is a very important element of some type of growth, whichever type of growth it is, that it's helping the organization to enhance its capabilities and really influence, in a sense that people get a growth mindset, that they ultimately start to believe that this is going to be enhancing for themselves, for their job, everyday job, for their pay, for the security of their job, and for their next step on their career path. And this is a joint work that has to be done. And these projects are mostly, the bigger they are, the more prominent they are in the organization. So if you think about it, many of the line managers that you will be working with, that will be their chance, which is not every day and it's not even every month, to present or present what they have done, or present their sub project or part of the project to the board of directors, to an influential people to the shareholders, to influential people within the organization. So they will have that will be their ability to shine probably, and so go for the next career step, potentially, if they do it well. And I think this is where I actually, when I would sort of going along with my career, building up my career, where I gained a lot of even personal friends, but also good allies for the future, where you try, because I'm an expert in M&A, and for many people, this is the first situation of that magnitude in their career, where we can help, or I can help them prepare best for this, for presenting and for setting up their sub project and performing well in front of their reporting lines and board members or shareholders, and that's where they can
But that is the positive side of the spectrum, because you also know people are now competing for a smaller set of positions, right? So it's also a competitive process that's now being set up, because they're redundant positions, and in the end, the total volume has to be shrunk. So how do you manage that part of the process? Because people under threat might lose their motivation to actually collaborate with their direct colleagues, because now they're competitors.
Agree. That most of the time, I must say, happens after the deal has been completed, and most of the time I'm not anymore in there at this point in time. Sorry,
you weren't in there for a second.
Somebody called me. I had to push it
out,
and so most of the time, so I'm in the lucky position. That's not for this part of the question, is that in the moment that the organizations are really being combined, I'm mostly not anymore part of the project, because we are there up until the closing and financing of the transaction, and the post-merger integration part is more with other people. So for my part, but obviously these fears are there, right? If there is a big organization which is particularly good on the sales and marketing front, and my client, the people in that organization know that they are taking over a competitor, and the competitor is particularly strong in this field, they know that probably at least their boss, or at least some people on their team, will be replaced with this new organization, because they are famous in the market for being better in certain parts, certain areas, or on the technological part, or wherever, right, in certain areas of the business. So there is always this situation as well, and that's actually tough. And that's what I was trying to say, that there is people who will have less intrinsic interest in the transaction, and you sometimes need to involve them for certain questions, treat them with respect, and obviously try to get information out of them. But I think that's also about trying to assess the situation in the right way, and sometimes keeping them a little bit away from what is happening day to day, and minimizing the requirement for them to work extra hours or putting extra effort into this, is also the question, like how to navigate around it, how to get the information from the organization as such, and maybe navigate around sensitivities in certain parts of the organization. The interesting thing is that my personal experience is that if you show people that you're interested in their contribution, in their intellectual contribution, even if they are not part of the bigger thing and they don't think it's ultimately a good transaction, and you always have people in teams that think they could have developed the technology themselves, they could have improved, they don't need this. But I think the moment you show interest in what they can contribute and their perspectives, people tend to open up and still talk to you. And oftentimes, as an advisor, as someone who only jumps in for a certain period of time and then will be out of the organization, we have the benefit as bankers that people are relatively open towards us, because they know that we are there for a certain period of time, and they can tell us sometimes, or explain what are the frustrations, and they don't fear that this will be transported throughout the organization and will weigh on their careers later on. So I think it's ultimately also the role of the advisor to show that you and keep as much neutrality in all of this as possible, and say, this is my task, this is what I'm trying to achieve, and I don't take positions or don't try to interfere with ideological questions around who is better at what, because I can't assess it anyway, but just try to fulfill the goal that I've been asked to do or employed for, because ultimately I'm being asked to join such a project because people want certain results out of me. And sometimes it helps to be neutral in this position and just take interest in the content that people are able to deliver.
Mm-hmm. But now, so once you descend in the organization and you start to engage with the line managers and their teams, right? In some sense, you're descending into the black box that you didn't know before. And then you might discover dynamics and attitudes and features and failures of organizations that might actually be in conflict with the goals of the merger itself. Right? So do you also see it as your task to bring that back to leadership in the organization, the board, to readjust plans? Or you see it more, I don't know, we just descend the organization, we prepare it for the merger, and that's it?
I think it is an important. I think that if I was the client, I would ask any advisor that is new to the organization to give their perspective, because as a new person, I think you always have a little bit of a different perspective, and you can see conflicts and issues with a fresh eye. So yes, so we try to bring it back, and ultimately it's always dependent on the depth of the relationship you have. Especially with very senior people, how open you can be about giving the feedback back to them. And I think for me, the projects where I think at the very end, where the client will also tell you added a lot of value as a bank, are those where you have a very good relationship with people at the top, with the board level executives, and can really tell them what's going on and what forces exist in the organization from a fresh perspective, and they would want it and want to listen to it. And oftentimes, just to give you an example, oftentimes when in those very close relationships where we've been working together for years, and it's maybe not the first transaction, and there is a lot of trust, I also gave the feedback to the board, or board members, that individually, obviously in this sense, that we spend a lot of time with the organization trying to phrase certain feedback in a way that people thought will not offend their CEO or CFO or whoever it was. And I think that actually for me, initially it surprised me. It doesn't surprise me anymore, but I still think it's not a good sign, and it's something that the C-level executives should ultimately work on and address. If you don't discuss the actual content, the actual, what you're trying to achieve, but you discuss the way you position and transport it to the C-level executives in order not to be perceived as the one that is opposing the project or is opposing some important steps. Mm-hmm. And I think this always strikes me, and I tend to, like, my very good and well-known clients of mine tend to tell them, you should go and talk to this and that line manager or manager of your subdivision, because she tends to spend more time trying to think how to best sell the question to you instead of about the question itself. And I think it's just pure loss of time. And it's an indication of culture where there is too much hierarchy, in my view, because
no, but so what you put your finger on now is communication. That in some sense you now establish a line of communication that was absent before, but it actually would be pretty critical for the organization. But then if you step into that role of communicating ideas and concerns and so on up the hierarchy, do you do that on your own decision, like, this is important, I gotta tell them that? Or you will only inform them when you're asked?
No, I actually inform them if I'm not asked.
Okay,
most
very
of
good.
the time.
Okay, but then at what resolution would you do that? Because take the example of the power industry, a very complex puzzle that you're building there and implementing. There might be, let's say, issues coming up that locally might be completely critical, but in that bigger picture cannot be considered because it would destabilize the whole puzzle. So how would that balance be struck?
I think, and obviously the perspective I would take is also very specific to my job, because my job is then to make sure this project works within the certain timeline, and also correct the timeline if the timeline is just not the right timeline, right? That's also part of my job. But ultimately, my job is to make sure that inform at any step of the project if the project is executable at all. Sometimes we also find that it's not going to work the way we initially thought it's going to work. That also happens at times, right? But many times it happens. Actually, many times it happens that we have to find out or have to explain that the initial timeline is tough. It's just too ambitious, or mostly it's too ambitious, right? And we need to adapt and adjust the timeline. And the difficult statements that I carry from A to B and make at the risk of sort of being considered difficult myself are only then when I think they endanger the process itself in a way, where I think they are endangering the process itself. And sometimes you can't, when you spend, I think, 12, 18 months very intensely within an organization from outside in, I think any executive will actually appreciate if you give feedback on the culture and how you consider and how you view the culture compared to other cultures you've seen in the past. Because it's just a valuable addition, independent also of the project. It's a valuable addition, valuable information. How people from outside in perceive a certain organization. I think that's
clear.
That's clear. Yeah.
So we went around the track now on how you would approach such a merger or acquisition. So what makes this really work? What's your best example, and why did that work so well?
I think I take the split of RWE back then in RWE and Innogy as an example, because it was such an important, it was really cutting an organization in two businesses. It was the opposite of a merger when you bring on something new, but it was cutting the organization into two businesses, repositioning both organizations totally, and giving both of them very different strategy. And it was such a big effort, and it had to work throughout Europe, wherever RWE had its operations back then. And we really worked locally with people in the Czech Republic and the Netherlands and Germany. And it was really a very, very big step for the organization from within. It was not just an addition. Like normally it's a bigger organization buying a smaller one, which is easier in a way. But this was a really big project. And I think what ultimately made it work is that there was a vision for both organizations, what they are supposed to become. And there was a lot of engagement, and there was a lot of effort and time put into really taking this project through the ranks down to people who work on everyday tasks in different regions, and explain to them what we will be doing, what's the target, what do we want to achieve, and how these organizations will work in the future, and what will be their vision of sort of ensuring energy and in the making sure there is enough space for everyone, and ensuring that they can proceed with their operations in the future. And I think that was a very good example of it. I actually, when we look back at it from a banker's and legal perspective, and I think we started roughly a year before the transaction was completed, and what had to be done within that year, it sounded like this is not good. It can't even work because it's just too many things. And it was really down to everybody, and I seldomly saw it that way, that everybody worked with additional effort, and everybody was convinced and understood what we were actually trying to achieve. And I think this is often underestimated, because the nature of these projects is that oftentimes many of the decisions and many of the ultimate outcomes have to be kept very confidential because of the capital market communication, and you can't overpromise and underdeliver to investors, and you try to work within the organization and not to bring too much to the outside world. But I think oftentimes the point in time where this is being made everybody's business is too late. And you ask people to do too many things before they actually get a full, proper understanding on what we are trying to achieve. Mm-hmm. And I think the ultimate success of this was that each and every person who was involved, independent of where in the organization, actually knew and understood what we were trying to achieve. And we as bankers spent much more hours in this project going to different parts of the organization and explaining how a new, and one of the companies had to be IPO'd or brought to the stock exchange and another time. So how this process works, what does it actually mean to be listed on it? So what they were already listed, but why are we listing a different organization? What steps is this taking? To whom will we speak? Who will be the new investors and why would they buy? And explaining it to people that didn't ultimately have anything to do with the process as such, right, but they understood what for they are doing it. And I think that was actually the amazing job done by RWE at that time, because they actually took everybody on board, and we had this huge kickoff meetings, and many of the professional advisors a little bit laughed at it at the beginning. They were like, "Oh my God, why are we having these hundreds of people here?" But it was actually a good decision because everybody knew what we were up for and that they are part of it.
So you're saying it was a well-defined goal, properly communicated to the whole organization so that everybody could get behind it, right? This is the bottom line. In this example, which indeed worked amazingly well. Mm-hmm. But now, at the other side, what has been the biggest failure and why did it fail? Why did it break down in that case?
I have the name, but I will.
No, you can. You don't have to name names.
Yeah,
okay?
I will not name it. Yeah, I will.
Organization X.
Organization X. No, but it was and I think it's symptomatic for. It's not only. I have a particular example from my personal experience, but I think it's also a little bit similar for many other situations where there are teams of engineers or technology people that you need to bring together, and each and everyone was always kept in a culture or was always nurtured in a culture in the organization in the belief that their technical superiority is the one and only success factor of the organization. I don't know if it makes any sense to you, but these are these organizations that are very centered around their technological benefit or technological superiority versus their competition. They really, and in Germany we have multiple examples of those companies that produce something that is really, really at the top of the market where they compete, and oftentimes these engineers are brought up in a culture where they think everything is centered around the product that they bring out. And all of a sudden there is someone else coming into play and being taken over, or they are being merged with someone, or they are being asked to help on a merger where the board decided to bring another organization into the firm. And they I have this example of engineers, but it's probably also in different areas, is where there is this content or intellectual superiority, and people judge the whole transaction from just one aspect, and they say, "Oh, look, they cannot bring anything to the table which we cannot do on our own." And then there is a big opposition, and if this doesn't work, I think this is the big challenge most organizations have, and why many organizations struggle, even if they enforce the merger because the C-suite decides to do so, or even more so, the family owner just ever wanted this to have this company forever, and then there was this window of opportunity where he could buy it and bought it, and the organizations run in parallel for years. They are not being integrated for years because there is the opposition from within, from people who think that they are the ultimate drivers of success of the company. I think from my perspective, this is a big mistake, to make just one group of people believe that they are the ultimate drivers of success. And I have a very good example from a company where it's totally different. Is where at Scania in Sweden, where I was surprised because Scania is sort of when you're in truck, Scania is by many truck drivers. If you ask the actual people who drive this car, who many times don't take the decision to buy it, but if you ask the actual driver, they consider Scania to be sort of the premium car or the premium truck among the trucks. They think they are the sort of the best trucks on the road. And if you go into this organization, and actually I expected exactly the same to be in there, right? To think everybody will think our engine is the best engine. And why would we combine it with anybody else? And it's very different. And the reason why it's so different is that every executive in the C-suite of Scania has been put in every position throughout his career. So everybody once was in the engineering team and once also was selling trucks to people and once was in the tax department. So they understand that it's a collaboration, it's a team effort. And it's not something that is built around an excellent, superior engineering team, but it's a whole thing.
So that means collaboration in that sense is also a matter of your culture. And what you mentioned about the engineers turning against change was nicely captured by the Spanish philosopher Ortega y Gasset in what he called the barbarism of specialization. And the issue there is that the specialist, the engineer, has so much confidence in his own skill or her own skill that they just generalize that confidence to everything else. So they're completely blind to the complexity of everything else because they really know their engineering, right? So it's the barbarism of specialization, which of course I think is a huge challenge in organizations because everyone would have a sense of, if you want, superiority in their skill. And then to communicate with others who actually have very different activities can make collaboration extremely difficult. But so now to go towards the finish line, did this whole period of COVID-19 and also confinement teach you important lessons about collaboration in the domain where you're active? Or it is still the same story, nothing changed?
I think, interestingly enough, I would think, especially from the communication perspective, the sort of video type of environment is actually helping to break through some historical or some situations which have been forever in a sense, and which now change. And why is because there is in this corporate, the bigger the corporate, the stronger the corporate culture, and the older the organization and the more established everything is. That they tend to be my clients historically because these are the big firms. And the bigger this is, the stronger this culture, the more there is a ritual of how people enter rooms, are invited into meetings, talk first, talk second, and all this kind of ritual. It's like when drinking green tea, right? In Asia, there's whole ritual of how you set up meetings. And I think the video meetings actually are shifting this more into a more content meetings, because you have to say something which catches people's attention relatively quickly, because people tend to, everybody tends to be a little bit more similar in front of a screen than when you sit there and have a room and there is a certain seat that already indicates that you're the most important person in the room. Sometimes it takes ages to people to sit down because nobody wants to take the seat that indicates that you're trying to sit in CEO's seat. And if the CEO happens to take another seat, it just confuses the whole room. And you don't have all of this in the video meeting. So it's really about what you say, and and the meetings are shorter. They are more to the point and more content driven. So that is on the positive side. I think that is something that that a little bit makes the culture less hierarchical and more meritocratic over time, I think, from that perspective.
Right. But on the other hand, you also, in some sense, you develop a model of humans, right? You develop a psychological model which you look at humans. And if economic factors are the decisive one, we're back at this old idea of Homo economicus, who just optimizes return, right, on investment. On the other hand, psychology has shown very clearly that humans actually are not that optimal and sometimes seem to act against this kind of optimization. So what kind of model of humans do you actually then bias towards? Homo economicus in your domain, or Homo unpredictable?
I think in the middle, it's not Homo economicus in terms of really return on capital, but it's Homo economicus so in terms of your social sort of relevance and position. And I think that is something that you can observe wherever, is that people want to be heard, want to be a personality, and want to be relevant wherever they are. They want to be relevant to the whole thing and to society at the very end. And the feeling that you're irrelevant to society, even if you have the capital on your side for whatever reason, I think on average is kind of making people feel insecure in where they belong. It's really the relevance and your role in the society, and the feeling that the society actually appreciates what you do and needs you. That's my take.
Oh, that's very good. But do you believe humanity as we are, with all our quirks, will we ever be able to really sincerely collaborate towards a sustainable future, sustainable society? Will we be able to do that?
I tend to be an optimist, and that's why I deeply believe theoretically we can. I think by nature we are collaborative individuals, and I obviously sometimes when you look at the sort of geopolitical situation, you struggle with the belief. I think it's a big challenge, right? And I think with one of the historians and philosophers of our time, Yuval Noah Harari, said there is no option. If we fail on this time, the challenges and the complexity of the challenges are so big that if we fail to collaborate on a global scale, we probably fail on our planet and many other things. And I tend to believe it is possible. I think in my micro sort of economic world, I've worked around the world and put transactions and people together from very, very different parts of the world. In China, in Brazil, in German company, Brazilian company, German company, Chinese company taking over a German company. Ultimately, down to the individual person and individual acting humans. And I think there is more commonality than there is difference in the way we are motivated as human beings. We want a certain security around our lives, and security ultimately means also financial means in our world. But then the other thing is about having the feeling that we are part of something that is important and relevant for the world. And I think this motivation is very similar, actually, from my personal experience across different countries and cultures. So I ultimately believe we can.
Mm-hmm. But then, if you could just change one thing in humans by magic, what would be the one thing you would change for them to be better capable in maintaining and building collaboration?
In the wish to be the star or the hero, I would change the hero culture, and I wouldn't change it by magic. I would change it by education and upbringing of our kids. Mm-hmm. Because when I read kids' books with my 4-year-old son, I realized that most of the books are around one hero. And if you want to find a book that is not about heroes, you need to go and search for one and actually ask friends and psychologists and to give you some books. And I think this is our upbringing. We try to believe that it would be best to become the one hero and not the team hero, or not part of a hero team, but sort of the one and only person who has all the abilities. And I think if we overcome that, and it's part of this is really how we are educated. And if we manage to sort of deal with that, and I think there are parts of the world where people tend to deal with it better. I think there are also cultures in the world that tend to deal with it better. And I think in our Western world, we still have some work to do on that.
Right. Well, Eva Maria Wiecko, thank you very much for this conversation. That was
Thank
great.
you.
Hi, you listened to one of our podcasts in the series on collaboration, produced by the Instrument Forum and the Convergent Science Network. You can find more episodes on our website.